A multi-million-dollar judgment in a case linking pharmacies and their roles in fueling the opioid epidemic in Ohio is in jeopardy. The Ohio Supreme Court's ruling out this morning sides with the plaintiffs, CVS, Walmart, and Walgreens, pointing to the payment of such a judgment and what's actually allowed by law. Court News Ohio is reporting in depth on this ruling from the state's highest court. We're bringing in 21 News legal expert Brian Kopp to explain where the issue is and how he interprets the law in terms of this judgment, why they won't want them to pay this out. Brian, two counties, Trumbull and Lake counties, were awarded $650 million in a judgment when they took on the pharmacies for their roles in helping to supply and fuel the opioid epidemic. The Ohio Supreme Court today says no, you cannot claim these pharmacies were a public nuisance under the Ohio Product Liability Act. So can you explain what the court is saying in terms of why this doesn't work under that act?
Well, this is subject to the appeal that's going on. So if you think about it, this was a federal judgment. It went up to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, but they were looking at an Ohio issue. So even though it was a federal court, they were looking specifically at Ohio law. And the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals asked the Supreme Court of Ohio for clarity on what Ohio law allows. And in essence, the court says, although this judgment was granted at the trial court level, it's not a good judgment under Ohio law, and our laws do not allow for this kind of remedy. So it really, really kneecaps the plaintiff's case here.
So they can't apply that judgment under the act they were citing. Is there any other way to apparently make them pay if that's, what they're going after still, which it is?
Well, there have been RICO claims that were brought, and I've seen some comment from the, lawyers that were representing these areas like Trumbull and Lake, and they are claiming that they still have the ability to bring a racketeering action, which is a different form of remedy. People sometimes get caught up in the judgment, but they don't understand the claim that is brought. I think that's a very, very large hurdle because the RICO statute, which we think about in organized crime situations, but there's great civil remedies, and it's not just organized crime, it's that they were doing things that violate a very specific set of federal laws in order to bring a claim, but it requires a conspiracy element, and I think that could be difficult. The nuisance claim was a much simpler path to recovery because they were just simply saying that the pharmacies allowed so much of this dangerous drug to go on the street that it created a public harm.
Now, you mentioned the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. They kicked this back to the Ohio Supreme Court to weigh in. Could this ruling then be appealed to another higher court now, or where does it go?
It could be in theory, but usually when federal courts have murky state law issues, they can look to the Supreme Court in the state in which the federal claim was brought for clarity. Federal courts hear federal question type claims, and at times they can hear claims that are purely state law driven. And so the federal courts, when they don't have great clarity, can seek that guidance from the Supreme Court of the state in which the claim is pending.
This case was a test, Brian, to see if the legal arguments from our local counties, Trumbull, Lake, could win at court with this. And it could have potentially and still could set off a wave of similar cases against the pharmacy chains. A federal jury found the chains liable for creating that so-called public nuisance. So I'm wondering, do you think that this case or others like it could resurface somewhere else?
Well, remember, this is a state law issue, so 50 states could be looked at differently. I have not surveyed how states are looking at it, but I do believe there's a handful of states that say you can bring a public nuisance claim. And it gets into this thing about, is it a product, and are you subject to consumer type claims, or is this something that was thrown on the public in a way that creates a very great harm? And that's what illegal nuisance is.
All right, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know you're on top of these types of cases from Ohio to Florida. You're so helpful. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Always good talking to you. Thank you.